Since Kennedy offered nuclear technology in 1960-61 to India before the Chinese invasion, and Nehru refused it after the war, why did they change their stance and oppose our nuclear program? It's believed that they were behind the death of Homi Bhabha and tried measures to shut down India's nuclear program. My question is, why did they change their stance? So it is indeed true that US President John F. Kennedy had offered nuclear weapons technology to India in the early 1960s, before the Chinese invasion of India. He had offered to help India create, build, and detonate a nuclear weapon. If India had agreed to this, if India had accepted the US offer, India would have been the first Asian nuclear weapons power. Mr. Nehru, the great Mr. Nehru, refused the offer, and as a result, the Chinese became the first Asian nuclear power. If India had nuclear weapons in 1962, the Chinese would probably not have dared to try and invade India. Right. So the Americans wanted India to be the first Asian nuclear weapons power. The Americans wanted India to be an American ally. Mr. Nehru rejected the American offer. In his great wisdom, he was a magnificently wise man. So in his as a consequence of the great wisdom that he had, he rejected the offer. And then what we saw is that he steered India into an alliance with the USSR. India essentially became a satellite state of the USSR. I know some people don't like me saying it. Deal with it. India became a satellite state of the USSR over time. Right. So the Americans wanted India to be an ally of the US, maybe a satellite state, a client state of the US. But what they saw is that India, under Mr. Nehru, very rapidly became a client state or a satellite state of the USSR. So essentially, India went into the enemy camp. The Cold War was already on. Early 1960s, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? The Cold War was very much on. It was threatening to become a hot war. And India had taken unambiguously the side of the USSR and rejected the offer of the US. So India declared itself. The signals that India gave to the US was, we are allying with your enemies. So that's very simple. That's why they changed their stance. Right. Initially, the Americans also wanted India to become one of the five permanent members of the UN Security Council. The offer was made to India twice. The second time the offer was made to India was in conjunction with the Russians. The Russians and Americans both offered India a place on the UN Security Council, a permanent place. And Mr. Nehru, again, in his great wisdom, he rejected that. So after seeing all of these rejections, the Americans said there's no point dealing with India and the Congress regime under Mr. Nehru and whoever else. And that's why they quickly changed the stance. And from then on, you saw that the Americans, uh, they started cultivating Pakistan, and eventually they even cultivated the Chinese uh, from the mid 1960s onwards. So that's how it went. But the reason why they changed the stance is very simple. It's because India rejected their offer and became, instead of that, an ally of the USSR. Now, some of you will say, no, 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 what are you talking about? You are stupid. India was non aligned. So, how can you say India was an ally of the USSR? We had declared, we had said many times we are non allied. Are bhai, do you understand the difference between actions and words? Non alignment was words, but every action that India took was that of an ally and a satellite state of the USSR. Please understand the difference between actions and words. All right. So that is why the Americans very rapidly changed their stance, and then the relationship between India and the US became quite adversarial.